Welcome to YQ Academy, Spring, Interview Questions and Answers. 1. What do you understand by @required annotation? @required is applied to bean property setter methods. This annotation simply indicates that the affected bean property must be populated at the configuration time with the help of an explicit property value in a bean definition or with auto-wiring. If the affected bean property has not been populated, the container will throw the initialization exception. For example, 2. What do you understand by auto-wired annotation? The auto-wired annotation provides more accurate control over where and how auto-wiring should be done. This annotation is used to auto-wire bean on the setter methods, constructor, a property, or methods with arbitrary names or multiple arguments. By default, it is a type-driven injection. For example, 3. What do you understand by qualifier annotation? When you create more than one bean of the same type and want to wire only one of them with a property, you can use the @qualifier annotation along with @auto-wired to remove the ambiguity by specifying which exact bean should be wired. For example, here we have two classes, employee and emp_account respectively. In emp_account, using @qualifier, it's specified that bean with the emp1 must be wired. For example, 4. What do you understand by request mapping annotation? Request mapping annotation is used for mapping a particular HTTP request method to a specific class/method in controller that will be handling the respective request. This annotation can be applied at both levels. Class level maps the URL of the request. Method level maps the URL as well as HTTP request method. 5. Describe Spring DAO support. The data access object DAO support in Spring makes it easy to work with data access technologies like JDBC, Hibernate, or JDO in a consistent way. This allows one to switch between the persistence technologies easily. It also allows you to code without worrying about catching exceptions that are specific to each of these technology. 6. Name the exceptions thrown by the Spring DAO classes. See the below diagram. It depicts all the Spring DAO classes in the hierarchical order. 7. Which classes are present in Spring JDBC API? JDBC template, SimpladeBC template, Nimet permitted BT template, Simplade sensor, Simplade call. 8. What are the ways by which Hibernate can be accessed using Spring? There are two ways by which we can access Hibernate using Spring. 1. Inversion of control with a Hibernate template and callback. 2. Extending Hibernate DAO support and applying an AOP interceptor node. 9. Name the types of transaction management that Spring supports. 1. Programmatic transaction management. In this, the transaction is managed with the help of programming. It provides you extreme flexibility, but it is very difficult to maintain. 2. Declarative transaction management. In this, the transaction management is separated from the business code. Only annotations or XML-based configurations are used to manage the transactions. 10. What are the different ORMs supported by Spring? Different ORMs supported by Spring are depicted via the below diagram. 11. Describe AOP. Aspect-oriented programming, or AOP, is a programming technique which allows programmers to modularize cross-cutting concerns or behavior that cuts across the typical divisions of responsibility. Examples of cross-cutting concerns can be logging and transaction management. The core of AOP is an aspect. It encapsulates behaviors that can affect multiple classes into reusable modules. 12. What do you mean by aspect? Aspect is a modularization of concern which cuts across multiple objects. Transaction management is a good example of a cross-cutting concern in J2E applications. Aspects are implemented using regular classes or regular classes annotated with the @aspect annotation in Spring Framework. 13. Explain JoinPoint. A point during the execution of a program is called JoinPoint, such as the execution of a method or the handling of an exception. In Spring AOP, A join point always represents a method execution. 14. What is an advice? An action taken by an aspect at a particular join point is known as an advice. Spring AOP uses an advice as an interceptor, maintaining a chain of interceptors around the join point. 15. What are the different types of advices? A. Before. These types of advices execute before the join point methods and are configured using @before annotation mark. B. After returning. These types of advices execute after the join point methods completes executing normally and are configured using after returning annotation mark. C. After throwing. These types of advices execute only if join point method exits by throwing an exception and are configured using after throwing annotation mark. D. After finally. These types of advices execute after a join point method, regardless of the method's exit whether normally or exceptional return, and are configured using after annotation mark. E. Around. These types of advices execute before and after join point and are configured using around annotation mark. 16. Point out the difference between concern and cross-cutting concern in Spring AOP. The concern is the behavior we want to have in a particular module of an application. It can be defined as a functionality we want to implement. The cross-cutting concern is a concern which is applicable throughout the application. This affects the entire application. For example, logging, security, and data transfer are the concerns needed in almost every module of an application. Thus, they are the cross-cutting concerns. 17. What are the different AOP implementations? Different AOP implementations are depicted by the below diagram. 18. What are the difference between Spring AOP and AspectJ AOP? Runtime weaving through Proxy is done. Compile time weaving through AspectJ Java tools is done. It supports only method level point cut. It supports field level point cuts. It is DTD based. It is schema based and annotation configuration. 19. What do you mean by proxy in Spring Framework? An object which is created after applying advice to a target object is known as a proxy. In case of client objects, the target object and the proxy object are the same. 20. In Spring, what is weaving? The process of linking an aspect with other application types or objects to create an advised object is called weaving. In Spring AOP, weaving is performed at runtime. Refer the below diagram. 21. What do you mean by Spring MVC framework? The Spring Web MVC framework provides model view controller architecture and ready-to-use components that are used to develop flexible and loosely coupled web applications. The MVC pattern helps in separating the different aspects of the application like input logic, business logic, and UI logic, while providing a loose coupling between all these elements. 22. Describe DispatcherServlet. The DispatcherServlet is the core of Spring Web MVC framework. It handles all the HTTP requests and responses. The DispatcherServlet receives the entry of handler mapping from the configuration file and forwards the request to the controller. The controller then returns an object of model and view. The DispatcherServlet checks the entry of view resolver in the configuration file and calls the specified view component. 23. Explain WebApplicationContext. The WebApplicationContext is an extension of the plain application context. It has some extra features that are necessary for web applications. It differs from a normal application context in terms of its capability of resolving themes and in deciding which servlet it is associated with. 24. In Spring MVC framework, what is controller? Controllers provide access to the application behavior. These behaviors are generally defined through a service interface. Controllers interpret the user input and transform it into a model which is represented to the user by the view. In Spring, controllers implemented in a very abstract way. It also enables you to create a wide variety of controllers. This is the end of our SQL interview questions. We hope you enjoyed learning with YQ Academy. Until next time, goodbye.